As always, our show is sponsored by Memoria Press. You can find our curriculum at memoriapress.com.
Welcome to Classical Etc., a show from Memoria Press that dives into the philosophy, culture, and heart of classical education. You're in the studio with Shane Saxon.
Welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm seated with Martin Cothran, Dr. Leta Sundet. Is that how you pronounce it?
That's right.
And Tanya Charlton. And we have a very special episode. We're going to talk about an article in the Classical Teacher written by Dr. Leta Sundet called Why Heroines Matter. But before we get there, Dr. Leta Sundet, what have you been reading recently?
Well, I'm coming off of Christmas vacation,
Right.
so this isn't really a fair question. But
It's not a fair question because you've been reading things you don't think of as quality, or because you've not read as much.
Right,
as
not
typical?
characteristic of my usual
of your taste and
high
interest.
quality.
That's right.
I've been reading a lot of British mysteries. Tanya and I were talking about
we
that.
have a common love of British murder mysteries.
Yes, but last night I did start Kristen Lavensdatter.
Have you read that before?
I never have, and many people that I admire very much love it. But I'm intrigued because one of my favorite authors, Isak Dinesen, really did not like Sigrid Undset, and actually wrote one of my favorite short stories as a response to.
Really?
Really? So I didn't know
Yes.
that. I would.
So
We need to read that short story.
Yeah, so I'm really interested.
What is it? Kristen Lavensdatter has made a big comeback in the
There's a
last
new
few years. I'm trying to figure out if
translation.
there's a reason for that.
Yeah, news translation.
New
I think is part of
translation.
it. Yeah.
See, I read the original translation, and I feel like I need to reread it in the new one.
I read it in the new one,
Yes.
and I thought I thought there was a couple anachronisms, just the way something was said, and it's so because of the setting, and it's in 14th century Norway or something. And I went back and I just sampled the original translation. It's much more archaic, and in a way it fits. In a way that to me the archaic style fits the setting and the story better. So, but I didn't know I didn't know what translation I was listening to.
It's hard to find the original. It's literally out of print.
Yeah, I have a boxed, old boxed set that's in really good condition that I proudly.
Absolutely. Now, Leta, we're not at all embarrassed by British murder mysteries here at this time.
No, I know.
So tell us which
I'm not
ones you've
really
been reading.
either. I love Sayers. So I just finished one of hers, and Nio Marsh, less known, but Tanya knows her.
I know. I've read everything she wrote.
She wrote 100 and something.
Yes. Yes.
That's not one I've heard of.
Oh, she's so good. She's kind of in the vein of Agatha Christie, but she has a main protagonist that is, just.
Now, these are the ones where everyone sits down in the parlor.
Yes, and no action really happens. They just sit around and talk a lot, and then they solve it. It's definitely not James Lee Burke, who's so active and so
visceral.
Yes, and so raw.
Yeah.
I love Robichaux, but it is very raw. That I think is when we start talking about male versus female.
Very masculine.
His are very masculine and probably harder for women to relate to because we really aren't into fist fights generally.
Oh, speak for yourself.
Well, okay.
Before we get into Tanya's fistfight stories, instead, we're going to pivot to what have you been reading recently?
Pride and Prejudice, because as from last week, I'm reading it though really contemplatively this time because Leta was coming to spend a couple of days with Lee and Dana and me talking about it, talking through it, and so I read it a lot more carefully this time than I have in previous years. I mean, as a teenager, I just read it for sheer enjoyment. In college, I read it because, I had to, but still enjoyed it. I mean, I said for years it was my favorite novel ever written, and I don't know that there's a novel I've enjoyed more or reread more times, and this time I'm enjoying it just as much.
We're going to do a whole episode on Pride and Prejudice.
So I need to stop.
Would you consider yourself more broadly an Austen fan?
Yes.
Okay.
I would. There is one Austen book that I am not a big fan of that Leta loves. And so I need to reread
So speaking
that.
of fist fights.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And we need
There's a
to,
fist fight in there.
Leta and I need to have,
That's the one.
we need to have a big discussion about that. But I need to reread it and see if she can sway me.
What's the name of said book?
It's Mansfield Park.
Oh, okay.
Yes, which she's teaching right now in the Memoria College online class. Maybe that's what I should do.
Oh.
You
Is-
should come.
Take the
I
class,
should
heckle
do
her
that.
from
Yes.
the comment section.
That's
I
right,
should
Aquaman.
do that
Well,
and just say, I hate this book.
I run the program. So we'll fill out an application and
Okay.
I'll
And you'll let me in? I have a feeling I can get somebody around here to help me technically get myself in.
So, Martin, what about you? What have you been reading recently?
Well, like Tanya said, I read Pride and Prejudice, but we're going to apparently talk about that later. What I will be back to tonight will be I'm reading. I read several books at a time. So I'm reading The Mind of the Moralist by Philip Rieff, which is about Freud's thinking. Dan Scheffler and I did an edition of our podcast, Dust Jacket, on Philip Rieff's Triumph of the Therapeutic, which is one of the best intellectual books I think I've ever read, and this is just as good. So I'm reading that, and then I always try to have a book of essays that I'm reading too, and I've been reading my favorite essayist, who's Joseph Epstein. His book Gallimaufry, which is just another. All of his books are just collections of his essays, and he's such a great writer. He's so easy, and he's just one of these people who's read everything. He doesn't even I think he's got a bachelor's degree, and he's probably the greatest essayist writing in English right now.
I am really shocked that you said that.
What?
I always thought Chesterton was your favorite essayist.
Oh, I'm talking about living. I'm talking about living.
He's your favorite living essayist.
Yes.
I see.
But
Very
he's just
old.
got this easy style. It's just clear as a bell. His literary references, he literally has read everything. And that's what he's devoted his life to. And he reads and he writes about it. And it's just great.
Did you just say he's very old?
He is very old.
Oh, yeah. It
I think
was in
that's
his
so
80s.
funny. He's living, but barely.
He was checking.
He's still writing.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Well, I'm reading The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain.
Yes.
I have a particular interest in American literature, and I saw someone just again say Mark Twain, father of American literature. And I read a lot of Mark Twain. I read Prince and the Pauper and some of the other novels. I think he wrote 8 total when I was younger. But I want to return to them because Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer specifically have never been my favorite books. So I'm trying to come back and see how I feel really about that claim of father of American literature.
Yes.
I
Which
find it
I'm
amusing, but
yes.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
coming
I don't-
back to Mansfield Park. You're going back to Huck Finn.
yes.
Maybe he's the father of of modern American literature. I mean, there's a big shift from James Fenimore Cooper to Twain. And of course, Twain wrote this great takedown of James Fenimore Cooper's style, which I agree with. But I love Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer.
I do too.
I think those are just fabulous books. But I recently read his Life on the Mississippi, and I thoroughly enjoy. And he's just kind of reminiscing, most particularly about his life as a riverboat captain. Was that? I think he eventually was. And I just found it utterly fascinating. I think Twain is just such a great writer, but he does seem to be kind of the father of this sort of ironic tone in literature, because he's very ironic, and so maybe in that regard he's the father of modern ironic.
So turning to our topic, in the forthcoming, and I think probably people have it now, but this edition of our catalog, the Winter 2023 edition, was just released. The featured article, this really great cover image.
Aileen outdid herself on this cover, I
did.
think.
And I really like how it kind of pops off the page by covering the title. What is it? The classical teacher. But it's entitled Why Heroines Matter. But anyway, here's the question. Tanya, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
Can a book with a heroine as opposed to a hero be a great book?
Yes. I can't believe you even asked that question.
Well, why? Give me a little bit of your...
I asked that question.
Yeah, so that is the central
But
question
you
of
asked it
Leta's
with
article.
an answer. You asked it so that you could say, indeed, yes. I'm putting words in your mouth.
Now you, Tanya, answer emphatically yes.
Yes, but I mean, maybe a male needs to answer this instead of a female. Of course, for me, as I said earlier, I relate very well with heroines, being a woman. I don't know that when I'm reading, I don't know that I even have paid attention to gender in my like to whether it's a male or a female who is the protagonist, as long as there's somebody that has qualities that I feel would be qualities that I would aspire to, virtue and integrity and all of those things that I don't remember ever paying attention to or thinking about whether it was a male or female.
Yeah. Martin, what about you? Your initial reaction when you hear this question that is kind of the central question of the article? What's your response? What's your gut instinct?
Well, reading the article just brought up a lot of questions in my mind about this issue of how a male reader reacts with a text with a feminine hero, as opposed to one with a male hero. It's hard because you got to go back and you have to think about how do you read. I mean, you can think about what you read, but think about how you read when you're doing it. It's hard to do, and I have never had any problem reading a book about a female, a heroine. I feel like, reading Pride and Prejudice again for the show, I don't feel uncomfortable. I don't feel any. I enjoy being inside the head of the female character, and it doesn't bother me. And in fact, Leta, you said, ask a man why he's reading an Austen novel, and he probably will not say it is in order to better understand himself, as opposed to what you said before. I don't know that I read just for pure enlightenment and enjoyment. So I'm not sure I asked that question at all. I don't.
Whether male or female,
whether it's male, it just doesn't matter to me. I enjoy Pride and Prejudice and Elizabeth just as much as I enjoy. I don't know what's a novel with a male character. I just as I would enjoy any novel with a male character, and I don't feel uncomfortable in being in the psyche of a female charter.
I do think,
and let's say, I also think that all of the men I know would not have who would read Austen at all. I think it's not a separation between males and females when it comes to literature with female heroines. I think it's just a difference between a literary male and a non-literary male.
I think that's it too. And right. I always want to know when I meet a man if he loves Austen. And if he does, I always think more of him, because I think you're somebody with an imagination who can read and who doesn't think, Austen is, or Anne of Green Gables is only for girls, which, and honestly, having taught Anne of Green Gables to 6th grade boys, they do come in thinking, I don't want to read this because it's about a girl.
See,
and where
this
does
is what
that
needs
come
to be
from?
reconciled to me.
Right. Where does it come from?
There are specific books that appeal to boys. There just are. Certain adventure books, and there's things that my grandsons want to read that are different from what Sylvie, my granddaughter, wants to read. So there is a difference. So I'm trying to, how do I reconcile that with the idea that when I think my grandsons grow up, if they're mature and well-read, they will be able to completely appreciate Pride and Prejudice or Persuasion. How do you reconcile those two thoughts? That's what I.
It does seem to me like, Leta, this is what you were thinking about when you wrote the article, and I'm going to ask you about that. But first, we're going to take a quick break.
Memoria Press invites your students to enter a world of truth and beauty found within the brushstrokes and handiwork of the great artists of the Western world. Join Kyle Yonke as he unlocks the works of more than 5,000 years of art history to explore how a classical history of art lays a foundation for the great artists of our future. A Classical History of Art, available now from Memoria Press.
Leta, what was it that you were thinking about that inspired you to write this article? What were you wrestling with? Was it some of the issues that Martin was just talking about?
Yes, and I'm hearing you both talk. I'm wondering, have I created a false problem here? But it actually is a genuine question for me. And to clarify, I try to clarify this in the article too. By can a book with a heroine be a great book? By great, I do not mean well written, insightful, rich, complex. I mean great as universal. So does the experience of this central character, is it somehow a universal experience that every single reader could somehow, I don't really like this metaphor, but plug their own experience into, that somehow it embodies the human experience, which I think we would pretty easily say about Achilles, that Achilles is before he's a male, he's human.
Mm-hmm.
Same with Dante, Ishmael. I think those are the examples that I used. I don't think it's quite as easy to sort of remove the femaleness of a heroine right off the bat. And I think I've heard a lot of men say, well, yeah, I would read Austen to better understand women. Like that's why I would. That's kind of the value that I would see from, not that that's not a valuable thing to better understand women, but that but there's something more particular about a heroine that makes it harder for every reader to kind of plug into her experience, and maybe what you're saying, Martin, about that does it have to do with age? I do think there is that that girls have an easier time reading books with male protagonists than boys do books with female protagonists. Is that just a maturity thing?
Well, I think because you said age, but I think you said maturity.
Yeah,
and I think it is a maturity issue.
So I think maybe the conclusion I'm coming to is it's more difficult to kind of see the universality of a female protagonist. Not
why?
That it's
why is
yeah.
that?
That's
well because you have to be able to put yourself in the psyche of another person. Okay, now a male does not have to do that if he's reading literature with male heroes. He doesn't have to do that as much. Whereas if he's more mature, he should be able to take himself out of himself and put himself in somebody else's situation.
But isn't that the same thing true for females?
Leta's saying not, but I think females, quite frankly, until they're very much adults, are more mature than males. And in a lot of respects, so she's enjoying this. No, they are.
Just trying to get you to say
I mean, everyone knows this, that girls in school that are more mature than the boys. All right,
True.
and I think so. I really do think this. Now that Leta said it, I think this is what really addresses this issue. Now, but I think later on, if a male matures, I mean, this still, you look at a whole bunch of sociological problems, and a lot of them have to do with immature males. Okay, so that's just a problem with males, and it's more of a problem with males than females. And so, but I think once that is resolved in a male adulthood, then I think you could read Austen.
Well, I think we could burrow into the question that you're asking by bringing in another aspect of what you talk about in the article, and that is there's the question of, do males or females relate to novels or books that have male or female protagonists that's the opposite of them? Or, on the other hand, is there something about the sphere of operation that the particular protagonist is in? So does a female not relate to a male protagonist-led book because they're at war? It reminds me of my father, who's an immensely well-read person, but doesn't love fiction, doesn't love literature. And whenever you would mention a book like this to him, he'd say, I don't love it. Not enough machine guns. The sphere of operation.
I don't think I saw a single one in Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, there's no machine guns in Pride and Prejudice. Spoiler alert. Do you think that there is a distinction between, because there are some perhaps books where the male protagonist does operate in a sphere of operation that is similar to the female protagonist? What does that dual spheres of operation add to your article?
Yeah, so my hypothesis is that if there is this problem of the heroine being a universal figure, that it has less to do with her gender and more that books with heroines tend to the setting, the sphere of operations tends to be more confined. Things happen inside houses and rooms,
and inside somebody's head a little bit more too, I think.
They tend to be about relationships and emotional turmoil rather than activity kind of going on in the world. And I think that's pretty standard. Even doesn't have to be just like war versus dinner parties. But most of the great classics with male protagonists involve some sort of journey, adventure, movement, just like physical movement. I think most with female protagonists don't involve a lot of physical movement.
Yeah, is there a psychological subtlety to many female writers that you don't find as much in male writers, although there are male writers that do have this, and I think particularly of Henry James. There's a psychological subtlety, and it seems to me like the people who don't like literature with heroines in them written by women won't like Henry James either.
That's I think a different question. The male and female writers, how does that affect things?
Yeah.
But is the reason we don't see as much activity from women because we are focusing on books that were written a long time ago, and women had a limited role. It was just, it just is what it is, and their lives are what they were.
And yeah, there are heroines in, Leta mentions Homer here. Also Shakespeare. Shakespeare has some very well developed female characters, very distinctive female characters. So it's not like not like they're not there, and it's not like they're not there in some of the greatest of Western writings, but maybe generally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of Penelope and Odysseus, Leta, you bring us to that point and use them specifically to illustrate your conclusion. How do you think Penelope and Odysseus in the Odyssey illustrate the point that you're trying to make in the article?
Yeah, so Odysseus, great example of the male-driven story that involves adventure, journeying, and the poem focuses on his experiences. But I talk about this great simile that happens at the end when they're reunited that kind of flips the picture on its head. She's been stuck at home, dealing with this very fraught political, familial situation, dealing with her grief over his loss. And this simile compares her experience. Well, it describes what seems to be Odysseus's experience of a shipwrecked guy kind of washing to shore and, kissing the sand, being so happy to have reached home. what sounds like his experience and describing it of her and saying that has been her experience, which suggests whatever was happening to her when she was stuck inside this house with these horrible suitors trying to figure out what to do was a kind of journey, and not one that Homer really portrayed. You know, he's focused on Odysseus, but he seems to be telling us, but no, there's a story there that I'm not going to tell, but that is worth telling. That's a journey. And that, that caused me to think maybe this distinction between male and female driven stories is kind of a false distinction, that we're dealing with different kinds of journeys rather than kind of the static story versus the active story.
Sure.
And it's also, it's not just that some of these stories are about somebody in a house like Penelope. It's also, you're also in the head a little bit more. You know, I mean, you read Austen, and most of what you're reading about is what's going on up here. In a sense, they're more intellectual than a lot of the stories about males, which are more action driven, where the setting matters more, where the plot maybe even matters a little bit more. Whereas you're reading Austen, and you're in her head, you're in the character's head a whole lot more than you are in a lot of stories with male heroes, I think.
Now, Leta, can I put you on the stand and cross-examine you?
Yes.
With some questions, objections and such? I think immediately, if I'm thinking of a book with a female protagonist, perhaps, a book that comes to mind is Anna Karenina. When you read that book, though, it seems like one of the mysteries and the beauties of it is how it shifts the point of view throughout the novel. And so you relate to Levin. Mm-hmm. You also relate to Anna Karenina. Do you think that maybe the false dichotomy extends to whether a central protagonist is even a mark of all great books? Or do you think there's room for great books that have multiple protagonists?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Yeah, because one could make the argument, well, Homer sort of has two heroes here. Though I guess I think maybe this isn't true of Anna Karenina, but I mean, the title is her name. She is the... She's
the antagonist?
She's kind of but she's the heart of that.
Sure.
So I guess I think that a novel sort of has to have that central figure. But you're right that there are many novels that will follow several characters. In which case that would complicate things too here. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned this before, the whole male author versus female author. If I'm messing you up here in your questions, I have a question. And so you have a writer like Jane Austen who's portraying a heroine. But then you read Tolstoy, and Tolstoy seems to be able to invoke the thoughts of a female character utterly convincingly, it seems like to me. And this is also the case with Wendell Berry. We were at a conference out here, and he was speaking, and somebody in the audience asked how he was able to write about the thoughts of a woman so convincingly. It was a female in the audience, and he did beg off a little bit, because he said, well, I will write, and my wife will review my writing, and she'll say, Wendell, a woman would not say this. So he says he has help, but there's still something about his writing where he's able to do this.
But he was an avid reader of Austen and many other female, George Eliot, and he studied those those female authors, and he read a lot about women and what they were thinking.
Well, he also did something that's essential, I think, to understand how women think he's married.
Yes, true. I don't know. I think my husband would say it hasn't helped at all. Helped him at all.
Well, and I think that's evidence, the fact that, and I think we could say vice versa too, that Austen seems to really be able to get inside the heads of men.
Yeah.
George Eliot, the same way. That is an argument for that fundamental universality that male and female authors seem able to write male and female characters equally well.
Yeah,
but I don't think that. Do you think Anna Karenina is a heroine?
No,
I don't either.
No, but okay. Yeah, see, I thinking back on Anna Karenina, I always think. I think Levin is the chief. I always wonder why did he name it? Because
he should have named it Lev.
It's Anna going to hell, and it's Levin going to heaven. I mean, it's really what the story's about. And but everyone thinks it's because it's the title, and I always wondered why did he actually pick that title? And then Kitty, it seems to me, is the heroine.
Yes.
Of Anna Karenina. I mean, what a wonderful female character.
Yes.
You just fall in love with Kitty.
Well, and I think Dickens has a lot of heroines. I think Dickens writes very well of women. Mm-hmm. And hopefully men reading Dickens, who also has many male characters, more male, I guess, than female, but I think that hopefully, they learn to relate a little bit better. I don't know. Why do we seem to be able to? I don't know. This is it.
Well, I check. Dickens is an interesting name to bring in here because I just grabbed a couple of volumes of literary criticism off my shelf, and one of the comments I think Harold Bloom makes it. He compares Austen to Dickens in terms of characterization, but Dickens is a little bit more caricaturish,
right?
But in terms of distinctiveness. He compares Austen favorably to Dickens. And
Leta does too.
Right. Yeah, right. But
she and I just had this conversation.
Yeah.
So another thought that struck me, Leta, this is a little random, but as I read your article, I feel like maybe proof of concept for your article would be that I think men tend to gravitate more to the Bronte sisters than to
That's
Austen.
because he loves Wuthering Heights that he says that.
And Jane Eyre. But also, I think maybe because the sphere of operation is slightly less domestic. And I wonder if that kind of proves your point that I gravitate for some reason to the psychological terror of the Bronte sisters and away from...
And many women do too. So, I mean, I wonder if, to kind of put a wrench in my own... Well, no, I don't know if this is putting a wrench in it, but I wonder if one could even say that women find it easier to relate to characters in a more active sphere of operations than these domestic situations.
Do women understand men better than men understand women?
No.
I think we're getting outside the sphere of this podcast.
Well, no, that's one of the questions that I think is one of the questions I got from the article. I mean, is that you shouldn't really address it, but it seems to me it flows out of this article a little bit. And again, I just think it's a matter of maturity. I think women are generally speaking more mature and intellectually, psychologically mature than men, and because of that, they can understand how males think better than males can understand how women think.
We'll make sure Joyce
that's my thesis.
You're still an enigma to me.
So let me end on this question, and I'm going to put you on the spot like I always do. Can you all think of your favorite book that is perhaps a female book, or as you said, a female-driven story, or has a female protagonist, and why? It's your favorite. So I'll start, give you a little time. What comes immediately to mind for me is As You Like It and Rosalind, one of the great female protagonists in Shakespeare. And I think I like that story particularly because of some of the motifs of fate and choice that are on the lips of Rosalind. That she's a philosopher in play, and the way that she ends up orchestrating her own story is a very clever subversion of kind of the roles of the time that were typically accepted. And that's what makes her such a unique Shakespearean character. And the way that she kind of interacts with Orlando is very, very clever. And so I've always enjoyed Rosalind and As You Like It.
Well, I think the two books and two characters. I think obviously, one here is Elizabeth in Pride and Prejudice, and the other would be Jane Eyre. I was completely captured by that novel, and I love that character, and yeah, so that's my answer.
Leta? Too many to pick from?
I'm gonna get Mansfield Park out here on the table
because my least favorite character.
I think she's kind of you want static, or what people say. It's a static character. Oh. This character who just doesn't move is the objection to the heroine of Mansfield Park. And Mansfield Park was kind of my gateway book to Austen. Oh. I came to love Austen really late for a girl, I think. Like, I was way into college. But reading Mansfield Park, and I love the heroine of Mansfield Park because she's such a surprise. After writing Elizabeth Bennet, who I think was voted, I don't know by who, but the character in literature that most women want to be and most men want to be with. She's an absolute delight. Austen wrote that novel, wrote Elizabeth Bennet, and then instead of, writing Elizabeth Bennet 2.0, as everybody else would have done, she writes this completely different, passive, quiet, contained, internal, character whose feelings prey upon her. And so many readers are just like, what are you doing? Yeah. So I love the surprise of that character and how she kind of opens up. She really requires you to pay attention to her in order for her to sort of open up and develop into someone really interesting. So I love her.
Okay, when Leta comes back in July, we need to do this again with Mansfield Park and see if my mind has been changed. Okay. But Fanny is not my favorite. She's my least favorite Austen character, and she's Leta's favorite. So what does that tell you?
Yeah.
But I don't know who my favorite female protagonist is. I've already said that I think Pride and Prejudice is the novel that I enjoy more than any that I've read. And
You're not
I keep
obligated
returning
to say Hannah
to
Coulter?
But I don't. Well, Wendell does have several protagonists who are definitely heroines. To me, Elizabeth Bennet is not, I don't think, the protagonist that I think because she's not really, I don't know, do I need an ideal person? And she gets there, but that process, she's not really the heroine above all heroines to me, even though I love the book and I love her as a character. So who would that be? Who am I looking for? I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to think about that.
Okay, think about it and get back with us.
I will. But first I have to reread Mansfield Park.
It's going to be Fanny in the end.
Well, I'm going to read Fanny now with a different perspective, just based on the few things that you've said here. And then you and I are going to talk. And maybe I'll watch your class recordings and see if you can sway me.
On that note, it's been a great conversation. Thank you all. And we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Classical Etc. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider liking this video. If you want to join the conversation, then you can comment below. And if you want to stay connected, please subscribe to our channel. I hope you enjoyed this show, and we'll see you next time.